He offered his mansion until the baby was born without knowing that she carried. The thud of a body falling against the icy sidewalk echoed through the lobby of the luxury Skyline building in Manhattan. Griffin Montgomery, who had just stepped out of the private elevator after another exhausting board meeting, froze at the sight of a young woman lying unconscious a few meters from the revolving door. "Somebody call an ambulance," he shouted as he ran towards a stranger. His $1,000 Italian shoes slipped on the polished marble as he knelt beside her. The first thing he noticed was the delicate hand resting protectively on her slightly protruding belly. She was pregnant. The woman's face, although pale, had an ethereal beauty that gave him an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. Her dark brown hair framed her soft features, and something about the scene aroused in Griffin an unease he couldn't explain. "Mr. Montgomery, the paramedics are on their way," said Richard, the building's doorman, already on the phone. Griffin just nodded, unable to take his eyes off the stranger's face. As she began to wake up, her green eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Griffin felt as if he had been struck by lightning. "Marlowe," she murmured, confused. "My name is Marlowe Bennett." The name reverberated in her mind like a distant echo, but Griffin couldn't reach the memory that seemed to dance on the edges of her consciousness. The car accident 6 months ago had left several gaps in his memories, black holes that the doctor said might or might not fill in over time. "I am Griffin Montgomery. You're safe now," he replied, keeping his voice calm as he held her hand. "How long have you been pregnant?" "For months," replied Marlowe, trying to sit up. Griffin gently helped her up, noticing how she was shaking. "I don't know where to go," she confessed in a whisper, tears starting to form in her eyes. Before she could think twice, the words escaped her lips. "I have a mansion on the Upper East Side with enough rooms to house a small army. You can stay there until you settle in." Marlowe's eyes widened at the unexpected offer. "You don't even know me," he protested weakly. Griffin smiled, a rare gesture that surprised even Richard, who was watching the scene with interest. "Sometimes we have to trust our instincts," he replied, although something inside him whispered that there was more to the story than he could understand at the moment. The paramedics arrived and, after a thorough checkup, confirmed that Marlowe was dehydrated and had low blood pressure, but was otherwise fine. Griffin insisted on driving her home himself, ignoring the 3 meetings he still had scheduled for that afternoon. During the drive in his Mercedes, he watched out of the corner of his eye as Marlowe absorbed the city through the window. His fingers were still intertwined protectively over his belly, and there was something about that gesture that touched Griffin deeply. "How did you end up on the streets?" he asked softly, breaking the silence. Marlowe hesitated before answering. "I lost my job at the art gallery when they found out I was pregnant. Without references, I couldn't get another job. The rent was late, and well," her voice faltered. "Here I am." Griffin felt a surge of indignation. "This is illegal. They can't fire you for being pregnant." "Technically, they fired me for restructuring," he explained with a sad smile. "But the timing was quite convenient." They arrived at the Montgomery Mansion, an imposing Georgian building with meticulously tended gardens. Marlowe was speechless at the grandeur of the place, but Griffin noticed that there was no dazzle in his gaze, just a deep gratitude mixed with something that looked like recognition. "Come on, I'll show you your room," he said, leading her through the marble-floored entrance hall and up a double staircase to the second floor. The mansion, although impressive, had always seemed cold and empty to Griffin since he had moved in after the accident. But now, with Marlowe climbing the stairs beside him, something seemed different. "Why are you doing this?" she asked when they reached the main guest room, an elegant space decorated in shades of blue and cream. Griffin ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture he used to make when he was nervous. "Honestly, I don't know. Something about you seems familiar, like a song you know but can't remember the words to." Marlowe's eyes shone with something indefinable, but she just nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery." "Griffin," she corrected automatically. "Please call me Griffin." That evening, after making sure that Marlowe was comfortable and well-fed, Griffin retired to his office. Sitting in his leather armchair, he gazed out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows while absent-mindedly twirling the family ring on his finger. Something about Marlowe Bennett intrigued him deeply. It was more than just compassion or attraction. There was a connection he couldn't explain, as if his heart recognized something his mind had forgotten. The gaps in his memory had never bothered him as much as they did at that moment. What had started out as an ordinary day had turned into something completely different, and as the last rays of the sun tinted the Manhattan skyline golden, Griffin had the distinct feeling that his life was about to change dramatically again. The first light of morning found Griffin in his office, where he had spent much of the night researching pregnancy and the basic needs of a pregnant woman. Empty coffee cups piled up on his mahogany desk as he absorbed information on prenatal vitamins, proper nutrition, and recommended exercise. His fingers paused on the keyboard when he heard movement coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Reynolds, his longtime housekeeper, wouldn't arrive until 8, which meant that Marlowe was awake. Closing his laptop, Griffin headed downstairs, unconsciously adjusting the tie he was still wearing from the day before. As he entered the kitchen, he stopped abruptly. Marlowe was standing with her back to him, stirring something on the stove, her hair in a messy bun. The scene gave him such a strong feeling of déjà vu that he had to lean on the doorframe. "Blueberry pancakes," she said without turning around. "I hope you don't mind me venturing into your kitchen. How did you know they were my favorite?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Marlowe froze for a moment, the spatula hanging in the air. Didn't know. They're my favorites too." The silence that followed was charged with something indefinable. Griffin approached the kitchen counter, watching as she worked with surprising familiarity in her kitchen. Her movements were graceful, almost as if she had been there before. "You cook like a pro," he commented, trying to ease the growing tension. "I worked as an assistant chef during art school," she explained, finally turning to face him. "That's how I paid for my studies." Their eyes met, and Griffin felt that same electric current as the day before. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of hope and sadness that intrigued him deeply. "Mr. Montgomery," Mrs. Reynolds' voice echoed down the hall, breaking the moment. The housekeeper entered the kitchen and stopped, surprised to see the domestic scene before her. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Marlowe Bennett. She'll be our guest for a while." Griffin made the introductions, noticing the knowing look his housekeeper cast in his direction. "Welcome, Miss Bennett," said Mrs. Reynolds with a warm smile. "I see you've already discovered the kitchen." Breakfast took place in a surprisingly comfortable atmosphere. Griffin discovered that Marlowe had an impressive knowledge of contemporary art and that her last job had been as assistant curator at the prestigious Hartley Gallery. "I know Marcus Hartley," said Griffin, frowning. "He doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would unfairly dismiss someone." "Marcus was traveling when it happened," explained Marlowe, his hand unconsciously stroking his belly. "It was his partner, Victoria Palmer." Griffin made a mental note to investigate the matter later. Something in that story didn't fit, as did several other details about Marlowe Bennett that seemed to trigger memories he couldn't reach. "I have an appointment with a memory specialist this afternoon," he revealed, surprising himself with the confidence. "Since the accident, there are whole periods that seem erased." Marlowe lowered his fork, his intense green eyes fixed on him. "What kind of accident?" "Car crash 6 months ago. I woke up confused in the emergency room. 3 broken ribs and a concussion that affected my recent memory." Griffin ran his hand over the almost imperceptible scar near his temple. "The doctors say that memories can come back gradually, but so far." "6 months," murmured Marlowe, so quietly that he almost didn't hear. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a sip of juice. Griffin's phone rang, breaking the tension of the moment. It was his assistant, reminding him of the board meeting in an hour. The reality of the outside world imposed itself, but something had changed. Marlowe's presence in his home seemed to awaken sensations and memories he hadn't known he possessed. "I have to go," he said, getting up. "Mrs. Reynolds will be here if you need anything." In Marlowe, he hesitated, choosing his words. "Perhaps we could have dinner together tonight? There's an excellent Italian restaurant down the block." Her smile lit up the whole kitchen. "I'd love to." All the way to his office in downtown Manhattan, Griffin couldn't get Marlowe out of his thoughts. There was something deeply familiar about her smile, the way she moved, even the sound of her laugh. It was as if his heart recognized something his mind had forgotten. As his driver navigated the city's traffic, Griffin watched the people on the sidewalks, couples holding hands, and wondered if at some point during those 6 months lost in his memory, he had been one of them. The answer, he suspected, was closer than he imagined, perhaps as close as the other side of his breakfast table. The consultation with the memory specialist left Griffin more uneasy than before. Dr. Harrison Shun, a renowned neurologist from Boston who flew to Manhattan every week to attend to specific cases, had noticed something peculiar in his latest scans. "Your brain patterns indicate that your memories are intact, Mr. Montgomery," the doctor explained, adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses as he analyzed the images on the screen. "It's as if there was a temporary wall blocking your access to them. This often happens when the trauma is linked to an emotionally significant event." Griffin drummed his fingers on the arm of his office chair. "And how can I break down this wall?" "The brain has its own protective mechanisms. Sometimes we need to respect its time." Dr. Chen paused significantly. "Have any recent events triggered feelings of familiarity? Déjà vu?" The image of Marlowe preparing pancakes that morning sprang instantly to mind. "Yes," he admitted. "There's a woman." The doctor leaned forward, interested. "Go on." Griffin recounted the events of the last 2 days, surprising himself with the amount of detail he could remember about Marlowe. The exact shade of her eyes, the way her nose wrinkled when she smiled, the way her fingers always found their way to her prominent belly. "Fascinating," murmured Dr. Chun. "Mr. Montgomery, I suggest you keep a diary. Write down these sensations, these moments of recognition. They could be important clues to recovering your lost memories." Leaving the office, Griffin checked his phone. There were 3 messages from his sister, Charlotte. "I need to tell you something important about the night of your accident." Before he could reply, a notification about his shares on the stock exchange captured his attention. Montgomery Enterprises was facing a hostile takeover attempt by Palmer Industries. The name Palmer made his stomach turn, the same Palmer that had fired Marlowe. On the way back to the mansion, Griffin made a few phone calls. In less than an hour, he discovered that Victoria Palmer had taken over the running of the Hartley Gallery during Marcus' trip to Europe. He also discovered that she was the cousin of Richard Palmer, CEO of Palmer Industries. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but something crucial was still missing. What was the connection between Marlowe and that night 6 months ago? Why did her heart race every time she entered the room? Arriving home, she found Marlowe in the back garden, sitting on one of the stone benches, sketching something in a notebook. The late afternoon sun created a golden halo around her loose hair, and for a moment, Griffin was struck by a memory so strong that he had to lean on a pillar. She was wearing a blue dress, laughing as she tried to catch a falling leaf. The same garden but covered in spring flowers. The sound of jazz coming from the house. Under Sir Griffin, Marlowe's voice brought him back to the present. She had stood up and was watching him with concern. "Is everything all right? You've been here before." It wasn't a question. The notebook slipped out of her hands, scattering sheets across the floor. Griffin bent down to help her pick it up and froze at the sight of the drawings. They were sketches of him, asleep in an armchair, smiling over a cup of coffee, looking out of the office window. The dates in the corners of the pages were from 6 months ago. "Marlowe," his voice came out hoarse. "Who are you really?" Tears began to stream down her face. "I didn't want you to find out like that. I didn't want to force your memories. The doctor said it could be dangerous." "The doctors? Do you know them?" "I was there, Griffin, the night of your accident." She took a deep breath, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. "We met at the Hartley Gallery vernissage. You just bought one of my paintings. We spent 3 weeks together, the best of my life." Griffin felt his world spin. Fragments of memories began to emerge. Laughter shared in a cafe in Greenwich Village, a kiss in the rain in Central Park, Marlowe painting in his studio while he watched her in fascination. "The accident happened when you were driving me home," she continued, her voice shaking. "You swerved out of the way of an oncoming car. If you hadn't turned the wheel at that last second, she couldn't finish." Griffin moved closer, his fingers gently wiping the tears from her face. The touch triggered more memories. Her perfume on lazy mornings, the sound of her breathing as she slept in his arms, whispered promises under the stars. "Why didn't you come to me before?" "I tried, but your family, They thought it best to keep me away until you recovered. Then I found out I was pregnant, and Victoria Palmer." Marlowe swallowed. "She found out about us? She said that if I got close to you, she'd make sure I never worked in the art world again." Griffin pulled her into his arms, and the gesture felt as natural as breathing. His heart recognized what his mind had forgotten. This was his place with her. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I'm sorry for forgetting, for not being there when you needed me. You're here now," she replied softly. "And someone you always needed. You took me yesterday, without hesitation." The baby chose that moment to move, and Marlowe took Griffin's hand, guiding it to her belly. The little kick under his fingers broke down the last barriers in his memory. There, in the garden where they had first fallen in love, Griffin Montgomery finally remembered everything. And as he held Marlowe in his arms, he realized that some stories are destined to have a second chapter, even if they have to start again from scratch. The news of the attempted hostile takeover by Palmer Industries spread like wildfire through the financial media the next morning. Griffin watched the headlines on his tablet while Marlowe slept peacefully beside him, having fallen asleep in a library after hours of conversations and recovered memories. The rising sun cast dancing shadows through the silk curtains, and Griffin couldn't help thinking about how drastically his life had changed in just 3 days. The memories that had returned the night before were still organizing themselves in his mind, some as clear as crystal, others still as hazy as a dream in the morning. His phone vibrated silently. It was Charlotte again. "You remembered, didn't you?" It was the first thing his sister said when he picked up. "Why didn't you tell me about Marlowe before?" A heavy sigh came from the other end of the line. "Griffin, you were in a coma for 5 days after the accident. When you woke up, you had no memory of the last few weeks. The doctor said that forcing memories could cause greater trauma, so you decided for me." His voice had a tone of accusation that he rarely used with his sister. "Mom thought it would be better that way." And after Palmer Industries started showing interest in the company, Griffin stood up abruptly, walking over to the window so as not to disturb Marlowe's sleep. "What does the takeover attempt have to do with it? Victoria Palmer isn't just Richard Palmer's cousin. She's his ex-fiancée," Charlotte revealed. "When she found out about you and Marlowe, she saw an opportunity for revenge. She always blamed our family for the end of the engagement." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. Marlowe's resignation, the timing of the accident, the veiled threats, it was all part of a bigger plan. "I need you to contact Marcus Hartley," said Griffin, his brain already formulating strategies, "and set up a meeting with our lawyers for this afternoon." After hanging up, he turned his attention to Marlowe, who was starting to wake up. His green eyes opened slowly, and a soft smile appeared on his lips as he met his gaze. "Good morning," she murmured, sitting up carefully. "What time is it?" "Just after 7, he replied, taking a seat next to her. "How are you feeling?" "Like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders," she confessed, resting her head on his shoulder. "But also worried. Victoria Palmer isn't going to give up easily." Griffin intertwined his fingers in hers. "I found out a few things about Victoria and her connection to Palmer Industries. She was using you to target my family." Marlowe straightened up, alert. "What do you mean?" As Griffin explained the situation, he could see understanding forming in her eyes. Indignation gave way to determination when he mentioned his plans to confront both Victoria and Palmer Industries. "I have evidence," Marlowe revealed, getting up to grab her purse. "Emails, voice messages. I started keeping everything when the threat started. I knew I might need it one day." Griffin watched as she retrieved a small USB stick from a secret compartment in her bag. "You're extraordinary, you know that? Just cautious," she replied with a half-smile. "Years of working in the art world have taught me to always have a plan B." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. While Griffin coordinated meetings and legal strategies from his home office, Marlowe organized his evidence and prepared a formal statement about his unfair dismissal from the gallery. Around midday, Marcus Hartley arrived at the mansion, visibly upset by the revelations about his partner. The renowned gallerist had rushed back from his trip after receiving Charlotte's call. "Marlowe, my dear, forgive me," he said, his normally controlled voice trembling with emotion. "I never imagined Victoria was capable of something like this. The meeting that followed in Griffin's office was intense. Lawyers took notes while Marlowe presented his evidence, and Marcus added information about irregularities he had discovered in Victoria's management during his absence. "It's not just about me," Marlowe declared at one point. "How many other people might she have harmed? How many careers have been destroyed in revenge?" Griffin watched with pride as she spoke, her voice firm and determined. This was the woman he had fallen in love with 6 months ago, strong, upright, and compassionate. The baby chose that moment to manifest itself with a particularly strong kick, causing Marlowe to pause in mid-sentence. Griffin was at his side in an instant, his hand finding the exact spot where his daughter, yes, something told him it was a girl, was moving. "I think she's ready to fight too," joked Marlowe, covering his hand with her own. The intimacy of the moment did not go unnoticed by those present in the room. Marcus smiled, remembering how he had introduced them at that vernissage 6 months ago, instantly realizing the connection between them. "Victoria Palmer doesn't know who she's dealing with," declared the gallerist, his voice laden with determination. "She has my full support in this battle." When the meeting ended and the lawyers left with their briefcases full of evidence, Griffin and Marlowe remained in the office, absorbing the day's events. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Going up against Palmer Industries could be risky for your business." Griffin pulled her close, his hands naturally finding their way to her waist. "Some things are more important than business," he replied, kissing her forehead softly. "Besides, nobody messes with my family and gets away with it." The smile that lit up Marlowe's face was worth more than all the shares in Montgomery Enterprises. And as the afternoon sun bathed the office in golden hues, Griffin knew he had found something far more precious than any corporate empire. He had found his way home. The morning dawned with a different atmosphere in the Montgomery mansion. In his bedroom, Griffin awoke to the soft sound of Marlowe humming in the bathroom. The domestic moment made him smile, but the tranquility was interrupted by the insistent vibrate of his cell phone. "Mr. Montgomery," the urgent voice of his press officer echoed down the line. "Palmer Industries has leaked information about your previous relationship with Ms. Bennett to the press. They're insinuating that she's trying to pull a heist." Griffin felt his blood boil. "Release an official statement immediately. I want a press conference this afternoon." When Marlowe came out of the bathroom, he found Griffin already dressed in his impeccable navy suit, typing furiously on his laptop. "Victoria Palmer made her first move," he explained, showing the sensationalist headline on one of the main news portals. "Montgomery Enterprises heir involved in scandal with pregnant ex-employee." "She wastes no time," Marlowe commented, sitting down on the edge of the bed. His hands trembled slightly as he stroked his belly. "Griffin, maybe we should—" "Don't even think about suggesting that we should split up," he interrupted her, abandoning his laptop to kneel in front of her. "We've already lost 6 months because of her manipulations. I won't waste another day." The phone rang again. This time it was Marcus Hartley. "I've just sacked Victoria," he announced without preamble. "And I have more evidence. She was diverting funds from the gallery to finance a secret Palmer Industries project." "Excellent," Griffin smiled, a plan forming in his mind. "Marcus, I need a favor. That exhibition we discussed yesterday." An hour later, Marlowe watched in amazement as a team transformed the main hall of the mansion into a makeshift art gallery. Her paintings, which Victoria had tried to discredit, were being strategically arranged on the walls. "A private exhibition?" she asked, arching an eyebrow at Griffin. "Better," he replied, adjusting his tie. "A public statement. The press will be here in 2 hours, along with New York's leading collectors." Marcus has made a few phone calls. Marlowe felt his heart race. "Are you going to use my art to confront Victoria?" "I'm going to use the truth to confront her," Griffin corrected, taking her hands between his. "Your paintings are extraordinary, Marlowe. The world deserves to see them, and Victoria deserves to be exposed for what she really is." The doorbell rang, announcing Charlotte's arrival with a team of stylists. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right," declared Griffin's sister, carrying several designer bags. While Marlowe prepared for the event, Griffin coordinated the final details with her legal team. The evidence against Victoria and Palmer Industries was substantial, but the timing had to be perfect. Mr. Montgomery, his assistant interrupted with a tablet in her hands. Palmer Industries shares have fallen 12% since the exposure was announced. Griffin nodded, satisfied. Richard Palmer had always been more sensitive to public opinion than to legal threats. The exhibition would be the final blow to his hostile takeover attempts. As the first guests began to arrive, Marlowe descended the main staircase, wearing an emerald green dress that highlighted her eyes and gently hugged her belly. Griffin momentarily lost his breath at the sight of her. "Are you ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "I was born ready," she replied with a determined smile. The exhibition was an instant success. The art critics present spared no praise for Marlowe's works, especially the centerpiece, a stunning canvas depicting the exact moment she and Griffin met in the gallery, perfectly capturing the electricity of that first encounter. Victoria Palmer appeared in the middle of the event, her face contorted into a mask of barely contained fury. "This is ridiculous," she hissed as she approached Marlowe. "Do you really think you can?" "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, Miss Palmer," interrupted Marcus Hartley, materializing next to Marlowe. "Especially considering that the SEC is very interested in your recent financial activities." Victoria's face paled visibly. At that moment, Griffin took to the small makeshift stage, drawing the attention of everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and clear, "today we're not just celebrating exceptional art. We are celebrating truth, love, and justice." His eyes met those of Marlowe in the crowd as he continued. 6 months ago, I lost some of the most precious memories of my life. But the heart has a memory of its own, and it has never forgotten." Victoria tried to make her way to the exit, but was discreetly stopped by security guards. Griffin continued his speech, methodically revealing every aspect of the conspiracy against Marlowe and Montgomery Enterprises. When he finished, the silence in the hall was deafening. It was broken by the sound of applause, initiated by Marcus Hartley and quickly followed by everyone present. Marlowe felt tears of emotion run down his face as Griffin came down from the stage and walked towards him. In front of everyone, he knelt down, taking a small velvet box out of his pocket. "Some stories deserve a fresh start," he said, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring set with sapphires. "Marlowe Bennett, would you do me the honor of writing the rest of this story with me?" The hall of the Montgomery mansion vibrated with an electric energy after the marriage proposal. Marlowe, with tears in her eyes, could barely articulate her yes as Griffin slid the ring onto her trembling finger. Camera flashes captured the moment, turning an intimate occasion into a public spectacle that was sure to make the headlines the next morning. Victoria Palmer had been discreetly escorted out of the event, but the damage to her reputation had been done. Social media was already exploding with videos of Griffin's speech and photos of the evidence presented against her and Palmer Industries. "We need to talk about the baby," whispered Marlowe when they finally got a moment alone in the library. "There's something you need to know." Griffin sat next to her on the leather sofa, their hands still intertwined. The engagement ring sparkled in the soft light of the lamps. "On the night of the accident," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I had just found out I was pregnant. I was planning to tell you over dinner, but then the car swerved into the lane," Griffin added, the memory of that night now crystal clear in his mind. "You were wearing that blue dress I love so much." "Yes." Marlowe smiled through his tears. "When I woke up in hospital, you were in a coma, and your family, well, I didn't know about us. I thought it best to wait until you'd recovered before revealing the pregnancy." Griffin ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Marlowe recognized. "But then I didn't remember anything." And Victoria seized the opportunity, Marlowe added. "She found out about the pregnancy through the medical records. Apparently, she had connections at the hospital. She used this as leverage to keep me away, threatening to reveal everything to the press in a way that would damage both you and the company." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Charlotte, carrying an old folder. "I found something you need to see," she said, handing the folder to Griffin. "These are the original accident reports. The police suspected it was no ordinary accident, but the investigation was mysteriously shelved." Griffin opened the folder, his eyes quickly scanning the documents. The car that forced us off the road was registered to a subsidiary of Palmer Industries. That means Marlowe paled, his hand instinctively protecting his belly. It means that Victoria Palmer didn't just try to break us up, she actively tried to hurt us. Griffin's voice was dangerously controlled. Charlotte sat down in a nearby armchair. I've already forwarded copies of these documents to our lawyers. With this and the evidence of the gallery's embezzlement, Victoria won't just lose her job, she'll probably go to prison. What about Richard Palmer? Asked Marlowe. Did he know about all this? I've just had a call from him, replied Griffin. Apparently, Victoria has been acting on her own. He's willing to make a deal, withdraw the hostile takeover attempt in exchange for us keeping Palmer Industries' name out of the scandal. And what are you going to do? Marlowe studied him intently. Griffin stood up, walking over to the window overlooking the garden where, just a few hours ago, they had exposed the truth to the world. I'll accept the deal, but on one condition. Palmer Industries must create a substantial fund to support independent artists and guarantee labor protections for vulnerable employees. Marlowe felt his heart expand with pride and love. This was the man he had fallen in love with, someone who used his power not just for revenge, but to create positive change. There's one more thing, said Charlotte, picking up her tablet. The repercussions of the exhibition have been incredible. 3 of Manhattan's leading galleries have already shown interest in representing Marlowe, and MoMA wants to include 2 of his works in the next exhibition on contemporary artists. Looks like Victoria did me a favor, laughed Marlowe, although his hands were still shaking slightly. All this publicity, you deserve every moment of recognition, Griffin declared, returning to sit beside him. Your talent is extraordinary, and now the whole world will know about it. A sudden movement in her belly made Marlowe gasp. She's especially agitated today, he commented, guiding Griffin's hand to feel the kicks. She? Charlotte arched an eyebrow. Do you know the sex yet? Not officially, Griffin replied, a soft smile on his lips as he felt his daughter move. But I'm sure it's a girl, and I think I know exactly what her name should be. Marlowe looked at him curiously. What? Hope, he answered simply. Because even when I lost my memories, I never gave up hope of finding something that was missing in my life. And now I know it was you, both of you. The moment was interrupted by the sound of messages arriving simultaneously on their phones. The first online headlines about the evening's events were beginning to circulate. But there, in the sanctuary of the Montgomery Mansion Library, nothing else mattered but the small miracle growing between them and the second chance that fate had granted them. The sun had barely risen when Griffin awoke to the soft sound of sobs coming from the bathroom. He found Marlowe leaning over the sink, trying to control a crying fit. Nightmare, he asked gently, wrapping his arms around her. Victoria, she replied, wiping away her tears. I dreamt that she managed to separate us again. That you, hey, he interrupted her, turning her to face him. That's never going to happen. Victoria is under federal investigation, and we have all the evidence we need to keep her out of our lives. The reflection of the engagement ring in the mirror caught Marlowe's eye, bringing a small smile to his lips. The last 48 hours had been an emotional roller coaster, from the impromptu exhibition to the public marriage proposal. Speaking of evidence, Griffin continued, guiding her back to the bedroom. Marcus called last night after you fell asleep. The gallery's full audit revealed that Victoria has embezzled almost $2 million in the last 8 months. Marlowe sat on the edge of the bed, absorbing the information. Where did all that money go? Apparently, she was financing a secret real estate development project through a shell company. The plan was to demolish the historic block where the gallery is to build a shopping complex. The whole block? But there are dozens of independent artist studios there, small galleries. Exactly, Griffin nodded, picking up his tablet. And guess who would be the main investor? Richard Palmer. The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Charlotte, accompanied by a woman Marlowe recognized instantly. Rebecca Hayes, New York's most respected art critic. Sorry about the hour, said Rebecca, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. But after yesterday's exhibition, I couldn't sleep. Marlowe, your series on memories and reconnection is simply extraordinary. The next 2 hours were dedicated to an in-depth analysis of Marlowe's work. Rebecca was especially interested in the central piece, The one that captured the first meeting between Marlowe and Griffin? The way you've captured the electricity of that moment, commented the critic, studying the canvas. It's as if we could feel fate moving across the canvas. That's exactly how I felt, Griffin admitted, his hand naturally finding Marlowe's. Even without remembering it after the accident, something in me recognized that feeling every time I looked at it. Charlotte snorted, drawing everyone's attention. We have another situation to deal with. The press is speculating about the timing of the pregnancy and the accident. We need to make an official announcement before they start creating conspiracy theories. I already have an idea, said Rebecca, her eyes sparkling. How about an exclusive interview for New York Arts Monthly? We can tell the real story, focusing on art as a means of reconnection and healing. Marlowe hesitated. I don't want it to look like we're using the situation for publicity. We wouldn't be, Griffin argued softly. We'd be showing how art can be a path to truth, to healing. Your story, our story, could inspire others. The baby chose that moment to kick particularly hard, making Marlowe smile. I think Hope agrees with you. Hope? Rebecca arched an eyebrow, curious. Our daughter, Griffin explained, his face lighting up with pride. Hope Montgomery Bennett. It's perfect, Charlotte whispered, tears in her eyes. Mom will love it. The morning progressed with plans being made. Rebecca began to structure the interview while Charlotte coordinated with the press office. Griffin occasionally received updates on the investigation against Victoria Palmer, each new revelation more shocking than the last. She tried to bribe the accident investigator, he revealed over lunch. There are records of a substantial transfer to an offshore account the day after the case was closed. Marlowe paled but kept his composure. The more we find out, the more I realize that we could have lost much more than memories that night. But we didn't, Griffin emphasized, his voice firm. And now we have a chance to turn all that negativity into something positive. The fund for independent artists, Marlowe added, remembering the condition Griffin had imposed on Palmer Industries. Exactly. And I want you to be the creative director of the project. The proposal took Marlowe by surprise. Me? But who better than you? Charlotte interjected. You know the difficulties independent artists face, especially in vulnerable situations. Your experience would be invaluable. Rebecca, who had remained silent during the exchange, smiled. And it would make a perfect conclusion to our story. Art not only reconnecting two people, but creating opportunities for a whole community. Marlowe felt tears forming again. Damn pregnancy hormones. But this time they were happy ones. When do we start? As soon as you want, Griffin replied, kissing her forehead affectionately. The future is ours to build. The issue of New York Arts Monthly, with Marlowe and Griffin's interview, hit the newsstands on a particularly chilly fall morning. The cover photo showed the couple in the garden of the Montgomery mansion, with Marlowe wearing a flowing dress that highlighted her 6-month belly, while Griffin hugged her from behind, both smiling at the camera with the sunset painting the sky behind them. Art, Love, and Redemption. The story behind the screens. Griffin read the title aloud as they ate breakfast on the heated veranda. Rebecca really captured the essence of our story. Marlowe flipped through the magazine until he found a reproduction of his favorite work. The painting of the moment they met. The vibrant colors practically pulsed on the page, transmitting all the electricity of that first meeting. The email started pouring in as soon as the magazine was published online, commented Charlotte, stepping out onto the balcony with her tablet. Dozens of independent artists wanting to know more about the support fund, and 3 major collectors interested in buying works from your next exhibition. Marlowe. Next exhibition? Marlowe arched an eyebrow in surprise. MoMA wants a complete series, Griffin revealed with a smile, about memory, reconnection, and new beginnings. They're offering the main space for March next year. Marlowe's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. But that's in 5 months. With the baby coming in December, they're flexible with the deadline, assured Charlotte. In fact, they think that having the creative process influenced by Hope's arrival will make the series even more meaningful. A gentle movement in her belly made Marlowe smile. Hope seemed to have a sixth sense for important moments, always manifesting when her name was mentioned. Speaking of Hope, Griffin began, his tone changing to something more serious. I got an interesting call this morning. Victoria Palmer wants to make a deal. Silence fell over the balcony, like a heavy curtain. Marlowe felt his heart racing, but he kept his composure, years of practice in tense visages serving him well at that moment. "What kind of deal?" he asked, his voice firm. She offered a full confession about the accident and the gallery hijackings in exchange for leniency in the criminal proceedings, Charlotte explained, consulting her notes. Apparently, spending a night in prison was enough to break her facade of power. Griffin watched Marlowe's reaction carefully. Over the last few days, since the impromptu exhibition that had changed their lives, she had shown a strength that constantly impressed him. "What do you think?" he asked softly. Marlowe took a few moments to answer, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "I think we've had enough destruction," he finally said. "The fund for independent artists will do more good than keeping her in prison for years." "Are you sure?" Charlotte sounded surprised. "After everything she's done." "That's exactly why," Marlowe explained, a small smile forming on his lips. "The best revenge will be to see the good that will come from her negative actions. Every artist we help, every career we save, will be proof that love is stronger than hate." Griffin felt his heart expand with pride and love. He rose from his chair to kneel beside her, gently kissing her hand. "You're extraordinary, you know that," she murmured against his fingers. "I agree." A new voice joined the conversation. Marcus Hartley had arrived, carrying a thick briefcase under his arm. "And that's why I want you to be my partner in the gallery, Marlowe." The proposal took everyone by surprise. Marcus continued, "With Victoria gone, I need someone with artistic vision and integrity to help rebuild the gallery's reputation. Someone who understands both the creative and human sides of the business." "But I thought that after the baby," Marlowe began, looking uncertainly at Griffin. "We can adapt everything," Marcus assured her. "A space for hope in the office, flexible hours. Art has always been about breaking conventions, hasn't it?" Griffin gently squeezed Marlowe's hand. "It's up to you, love, but I think you'd be amazing in this position." Marlowe looked at the expectant faces around her, her fiancé, her future sister-in-law, her mentor. Each of them represented a different part of the puzzle that his life had become over the last few months. "Yes," she finally said, a smile lighting up her face. "Yes to everything, society, the MoMA exhibition, the deal with Victoria. It's time to turn all these experiences into something meaningful." Charlotte was already on the phone, coordinating the next steps, while Marcus began to detail his plans for restructuring the gallery. But Marlowe only had eyes for Griffin, who watched her with that look that made her heart melt. "Thank you," he whispered, just for her to hear. "For what?" "For not giving up, for believing in us even when I couldn't remember, for carrying not only our daughter, but also our memories all this time." A solitary tear trickled down Marlowe's cheek, promptly wiped away by Griffin's affectionate thumb. The future opened up before them like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with color, love, and hope. The first snowfall of the winter covered Manhattan in a blanket of white when Marlowe woke up feeling the first contractions. The due date was still 3 weeks away, but Hope, like her mother, seemed to have her own plans. "Griffin," she called softly, touching her sleeping fiancé's shoulder. He woke instantly, years of emergency meetings having trained him to be alert within seconds. "Is it time?" he asked, reaching for his phone and the suitcase he had prepared weeks before. "I think so, but the contractions are still." Marlowe stopped in mid-sentence, closing her eyes as another wave of pain washed over her. "Okay, it's definitely time." The drive to New York Presbyterian Hospital was surprisingly quiet, the snow keeping most drivers at home that early in the morning. Griffin kept one hand on the wheel and the other firmly holding Marlowe's, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "I've called Charlotte and Marcus," he informed them as they waited at a traffic light. "They'll meet us at the hospital." Marlowe nodded, concentrating on her breathing as she had learned in her childbirth preparation classes. Her thoughts wandered to the last few months, the exhibition that had changed their lives, Victoria Palmer's confession, the preparations for Hope's arrival. The gallery was flourishing under her co-direction with Marcus. They had transformed the basement space into a support center for emerging artists, offering not only exhibitions, but also legal and financial assistance through the fund set up by Palmer Industries. Miss Bennett, Dr. Chun, her obstetrician, greeted them at the entrance to the maternity ward. Looks like someone decided to make an early entrance. The next few hours unfolded in a haze of contractions, controlled breathing, and words of encouragement. Griffin didn't leave Marlowe's side for a second, even when she squeezed his hand hard enough to leave marks. In the hallway, Charlotte was coordinating the arrival of the Montgomery family. Griffin's parents had taken the first flight from Boston as soon as they heard, and his younger sister, Sophia, was driving from Connecticut with her husband. "Remember the first time we saw each other?" Griffin whispered during a moment's pause between contractions. "You were explaining the meaning behind that abstract painting in the gallery." Marlowe smiled, despite his discomfort. "You said it looked like a collection of random spots. And you spent 20 minutes showing me how each stroke told a different story," he laughed softly. "It was at that moment that I realized I was in trouble." "Why?" "Because I'd never met someone who could see so much beauty where others saw only chaos." A particularly strong contraction interrupted the nostalgic moment. Dr. Chen checked the progress and announced that it was time to start pushing. "Are you ready to meet your daughter?" she asked with an encouraging smile. The next few minutes were intense, filled with words of encouragement and the sound of the baby's heartbeat on the monitor. And then, at 5:47 a.m. on a snowy Wednesday morning, Hope Montgomery Bennett announced her arrival into the world with a loud, healthy cry. "She's perfect," Griffin murmured, tears streaming freely down her face as the nurse placed the little pink bundle in Marlowe's arms. Hope had her mother's green eyes and her father's aristocratic nose. Her little fingers instinctively closed around Griffin's finger when he offered it, and in that moment, he knew that his heart had just expanded in a way he had never imagined possible. "Welcome to the world, little Hope," whispered Marlowe, kissing his daughter's delicate forehead. "We've waited so long for you." Charlotte quietly entered the room a few minutes later, carrying a package wrapped in silver paper. "A welcome home present for my niece," she explained, handing the package to Marlowe. Inside was a delicate mobile, made with miniatures of Marlowe's most significant paintings, including the one of his first meeting with Griffin. "So she'll always remember her parents' love story," said Charlotte, wiping away a tear. The next few hours were a parade of controlled visits. Griffin's parents, Marcus bringing a huge bouquet of white roses, Sophia with a basket full of organic baby products. "I got this earlier today," Griffin commented when they were finally alone again, showing Marlowe an envelope. "It's from Victoria Palmer." Inside was a handwritten letter and a substantial check for the artist's fund. The letter was brief, but sincere in its regret and desire for redemption. "She starts her community service next week," Griffin continued. "She asked to work specifically with our art therapy program for at-risk youth." Marlowe watched Hope sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Sometimes second chances come in unexpected forms," he reflected. Like a starry night 9 months ago, when a workaholic executive decided to give contemporary art a try. Griffin leaned in to kiss her softly. "Best decision I ever made." Hope's first days at home transformed the Montgomery mansion into a completely new environment. Griffin's austere office now housed an elegant crib next to his work desk, allowing him to keep his daughter close by during their video conferences. Marlowe had converted a corner of the studio into a breastfeeding space, from where she could watch the snow falling while feeding her little one. "Moma called again," Griffin remarked one morning as he made them both coffee. "They want to confirm that March is still viable for your exhibition." Marlowe cradled Hope in his arms, considering the proposal. The last few weeks had been a delicate dance between motherhood and art. Preliminary sketches of the new series emerged during night feeds, inspired by the soft light of the lamp and the dancing shadows on her daughter's face. "I think we can keep March going," she replied after a moment. "In fact, Hope has been my greatest source of inspiration. Each painting is becoming a reflection on rebirth and new beginnings." Griffin's phone vibrated with a message from Marcus. The gallery was thriving under the new management, and the artist support program had already benefited 15 emerging talents in its first month. "Victoria started her community work yesterday," he reported, taking a seat next to Marlowe. Marcus said she spent the morning organizing materials for the art therapy classes. "How did she seem?" "Different. More humble." "Apparently," She asked if you'd agree to meet her sometime. Marlowe watched Hope sleep peacefully, her little fingers clutching the blanket Charlotte had knitted. Maybe, when the time is right. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Rebecca Hayes. The art critic had become a constant presence in their lives, fascinated by Marlowe's creative process post-motherhood. "I brought bagels," she announced, placing a bag from Manhattan's best bakery on the table, and some interesting news from the art world. As they shared breakfast, Rebecca revealed that Marlowe and Griffin's story had inspired a trend on the art circuit. Galleries were starting to implement more inclusive policies and support programs for artists in vulnerable situations. "You've started a movement," smiled Rebecca, making notes in her notebook. "Art has always been about transformation, but we rarely see this concept applied so practically in the market itself." Hope woke up at that moment, her green eyes so similar to her mother's, observing her surroundings with curiosity. Griffin took her from Marlowe's arms, and the contrast between his impeccable suit and the small body nestled against his chest was a heart-melting image. "Speaking of transformation," Rebecca continued, "the Montgomery Bennett Foundation for the Arts received 3 partnership proposals this week. It seems that other institutions want to replicate their model of support." Marlowe exchanged a meaningful glance with Griffin. The foundation had been their joint idea, born during long nights of conversation in the last months of her pregnancy. It was a way of institutionalizing the work they had started with the fund created after the agreement with Palmer Industries. "We need to expand the team," Griffin reflected, gently shaking Hope, who was beginning to fidget. "Charlotte mentioned that she knows some professionals interested in working with social programs through art." "Speaking of Charlotte," Marlowe reminded him, "she's organizing a charity event for next month. She wants to bring art and mental health awareness together." Rebecca brightened at the information. "Perfect for my next story. Art as a healing tool. The Montgomery Bennett's Silent Revolution." The rest of the morning passed between discussions about the future of the foundation and plans for the exhibition at MoMA. Hope remained surprisingly calm, as if she understood the importance of the conversations around her. When Rebecca left, promising to return next week for a more detailed interview, Marlowe found Griffin in his office, Hope sleeping peacefully on his lap while he reviewed documents. "You know what I realized?" she commented, leaning against the doorframe. "What?" "That sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges. If Victoria hadn't acted as she did, we might never have created the foundation. Maybe we wouldn't be helping so many people." Griffin considered her words, his fingers gently stroking Hope's dark hair. "You always manage to find light even in the darkest moments. It's one of her greatest gifts. I've learned that life rarely follows the path we plan." Marlowe smiled, moving closer to kiss his daughter's forehead. "But sometimes, the path it chooses is even better than imagined." The soft sound of Hope's breathing filled the office, a melody that had become the soundtrack of their lives. Outside, the snow continued to fall over Manhattan, covering the city in its white blanket of endless possibilities. Hope's first birthday coincided with the opening of the Marlowe exhibition at MoMA. The little girl, wearing a pink tulle dress chosen by Charlotte, charmed the guests as she balanced on her first steps, clinging to her father's legs. "She completely stole the show," Marcus commented, noting how even the most serious art critics melted at Hope's lopsided smile. The exhibition Renaissance, Memories Rediscovered, occupied the museum's main gallery. 15 monumental canvases told the story of loss and reconnection through Marlowe's eyes, culminating in a centerpiece that left visitors breathless. A triptych depicting Hope's birth, with colors that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. "It's extraordinary how you've captured the essence of motherhood," Rebecca Hayes commented, studying one of the works. "The way the light interacts with the shadows. It's as if we can feel the weight of a new life forming." Griffin watched Marlowe from afar, admiring how she navigated the groups of critics and collectors with natural grace. Hope now nestled on her hip. The last year had transformed his fiancée in ways he'd never imagined possible. She radiated a confidence that went beyond professional success. "Mr. Montgomery?" A hesitant voice snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Victoria Palmer, looking smaller and more fragile in a simple black dress, very different from the ostentatious outfits she usually wore. "Victoria," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here. Marlowe invited me," she explained, nervously twisting the exhibition program between her hands. "He said it would be appropriate, considering that my mistakes ended up leading to all this." Griffin observed the changes in her former adversary. Community work and compulsory therapy seemed to have done Victoria good. There was a genuine humility in her eyes that had previously only known ambition. "The art therapy program is making a difference," she continued. "Last week, one of the teenagers was able to express the trauma of the abuse for the first time through painting. It was transformative." Before Griffin could respond, Marlowe approached, Hope extending her arms encouragingly to her father. "Victoria," Marlowe greeted with a small smile. "How nice of you to come." The moment could have been tense, but Hope broke through any discomfort by offering her partially chewed cookie to Victoria, drawing surprised laughter from the three adults. "She has her heart," Victoria commented softly to Marlowe. "Always seeing the best in people, even when they don't deserve it." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Marlowe replied, settling Hope in his arms. "That's what I've learned over the last year. Sometimes we need to lose something to find a greater purpose." Victoria nodded. "The fund is doing an incredible job. Richard, my cousin, mentioned that other companies are following suit, creating similar programs." "That's true," Griffin confirmed. "Charlotte is coordinating partnerships with 3 corporations that want to implement art and social welfare initiatives." The conversation was interrupted by the announcement that the charity auction was about to begin. One of Marlowe's works would be auctioned off, with all proceeds going towards expanding the art therapy program. "I need to get ready," Marlowe said, handing Hope over to Griffin. "Victoria, maybe we can have coffee next week? I'd like to hear more about your work with young people." Victoria seemed momentarily stunned by the invitation, but nodded quickly. As she walked away to find her seat, Griffin kissed Marlowe's temple. "You never cease to amaze me," he murmured. "Life's too short to carry grudges," she replied, stroking Hope's plump cheek. "Besides, look what we've gained through all that pain. Our family, the foundation, the chance to make a difference in other people's lives." The auction was a resounding success. Marlowe's work, a powerful canvas depicting the moment Griffin found her passed out in front of the building, was snapped up for a sum that would guarantee the art therapy program would run for 2 years. Later, when the last guest had left and Hope was sleeping peacefully in Charlotte's arms, Griffin found Marlowe standing in front of the birth triptych. "Do you know what I love most about this series?" he asked, tugging her from behind. "What?" "How you've turned our story into something universal. It's not just about us. It's about second chances, redemption, the transformative power of love and art." Marlowe turned in her arms, her green eyes shining with restrained tears. "I've thought a lot about destiny this year. How every choice, every moment of pain or joy brought us exactly where we needed to be. Even Victoria? Especially Victoria. Her actions separated us temporarily, but brought us together in a deeper and more meaningful way. And now, through the foundation, we're helping other people find their own path to healing." The sound of Charlotte's heels echoed through the empty gallery as she approached with Hope still asleep. "Sorry to interrupt, but I think someone needs their bed." As they prepared to leave, Marlowe took one last look at the exhibition that marked not only his triumphant return to the art world, but also the extraordinary journey his life had become. Somewhere between the brushstrokes of color and light, between the shadows and highlights of his canvases, was written a love story that transcended memory loss, overcame adversity, and found redemption in the simplest and most profound act of all: forgiving. 3 months after the MoMA exhibition, the Montgomery Bennett Foundation opened its first art center dedicated exclusively to social programs. The building, a completely renovated former textile factory in Brooklyn, housed studios, classrooms, and a community gallery. "It's even more impressive than I imagined," Marlowe commented, carrying Hope through the vast space during the final inspection before the official opening. The little girl, now 15 months old, pointed excitedly at the colorful murals that decorated the walls. Griffin watched the two of them as he finalized some details with the security team. The center was the culmination of a shared dream, but it also represented something greater, tangible proof that sometimes the worst circumstances can generate the best results. The first class of the artist residency program arrives next week, Charlotte announced, consulting her tablet. 15 artists from different backgrounds, all with projects focused on social impact. Victoria Palmer, who now coordinated the art therapy program full-time, emerged from one of the classrooms carrying portfolios. The teenagers from the rehabilitation center have finished their first projects, she said, her face alight with a genuine enthusiasm that she had previously reserved only for corporate negotiations. Marlowe picked up one of the portfolios, leafing through the works with interest. "This is extraordinary," he murmured, pausing on a particularly moving self-portrait. "The way she used shadows to represent the trauma." "Jenny is only 16, Victoria explained softly. It was the first time she was able to express what happened to her without having a panic attack. Griffin approached, Hope immediately holding out her arms to him. "We need to document these results," he said, settling his daughter on his hip, "to show other institutions the transformative power of art." "Rebecca is already working on that," Charlotte interjected. "She wants to do a series of reports on the impact of the program. And 3 other cities have already shown interest in replicating our model." The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, announcing the arrival of Marcus Hartley. The gallerist was carrying a folder that Marlowe recognized immediately. It was the first draft of the project they had discussed weeks ago. "The final approvals are in," he announced, a satisfied smile on his face. "We can start expanding the gallery to include the educational space." The news was greeted with enthusiasm. The expansion would allow the gallery to offer free educational programs alongside the commercial exhibitions, creating an environment where high-level art and community projects would coexist harmoniously. "Daddy art!" Hope suddenly exclaimed, pointing to one of the murals. It was one of Marlowe's favorite works, a vibrant representation of people from different backgrounds united through artistic expression. "That's right, Princess," Griffin smiled, moving closer to the wall so that Hope could get a better look at the details. "Art brings people together." Victoria watched the scene with a mixture of emotions on her face. "I never imagined that my mistakes could lead to something so significant," she commented softly to Marlowe. "Sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to find our true purpose," Marlowe replied, placing a comforting hand on his former rival's shoulder. "You've turned your regret into positive action. That's what matters." The rest of the afternoon was dedicated to final preparations for the inauguration. While Griffin coordinated the installation of the security system with Charlotte, Marlowe conducted a meeting with the volunteer teachers who would be starting classes next week. "Remember," she told the assembled group, "we're not just teaching artistic techniques. We're offering tools for expression, for healing, for personal transformation." Hope, who was playing quietly in a corner of the room with her crayons, would occasionally look up at her mother with an expression of concentration that was identical to Griffin's during important meetings. At the end of the day, as the sun began to set over Brooklyn, the Montgomery Bennett family gathered on the center's terrace. From there, they could see the silhouette of Manhattan cut out against the orange sky. "We did it," Griffin murmured, hugging Marlowe from behind as Hope slept peacefully in the stroller next to them. "We turned pain into purpose." "And that's just the beginning," Marlowe replied, entwining her fingers with his. "Every life touched by this place will be a story of transformation. Every artist who finds their voice here will be a testament to the power of the second chance." The soft afternoon wind carried promises of change and hope. The next day, the doors of the Montgomery Bennett Art Center would open to its first class of students, and a new chapter would begin, not just for Marlowe and Griffin, but for all those who would find there a space for healing and renewal. The celebration of the Montgomery Bennett Foundation's 2nd anniversary coincided with a crucial moment in Griffin and Marlowe's personal lives. One spring morning, while Hope was playing with her colorful blocks in the mansion's office, the couple received the news that would once again change the course of their lives. "Positive," Marlowe whispered, her hands shaking slightly as she held up the pregnancy test. Griffin, who was checking some documents on his desk, looked up immediately, his face lighting up with a mixture of surprise and joy. "We have to tell Hope," he said, getting up to hug his wife. She's been asking for a baby brother for months. The Art Center in Brooklyn had become a successful model, with programs replicated in 5 other American cities. Victoria Palmer's work with art therapy had received national recognition, and she was about to publish a book about her experience of personal transformation through art. Mr. Montgomery, her assistant, interrupted through the intercom. Marcus Hartley is on the line. It sounds urgent. The news Marcus brought was surprising. The Guggenheim was interested in partnering with the foundation to create a permanent artist residency program focused on artists from marginalized communities. It's a unique opportunity, Marcus explained, his enthusiasm evident even over the phone. They've been impressed with the results of our art therapy program and want to expand the concept. Marlowe, who could hear the conversation, exchanged a meaningful glance with Griffin. This was exactly the kind of recognition that could catapult his work onto a global scale. Hope, sensing the atmosphere of excitement in the office, abandoned her blocks and walked over to her mother, her dark curls swaying with every step. "Happy, Mommy?" she asked in her sweet 2-year-old voice. "Very happy, my love," Marlowe replied, taking her daughter on her lap. "Mommy and Daddy have a very special surprise for you." Charlotte arrived for lunch with more news. The traveling exhibition featuring the work of the participants in the art therapy program had been a success in Chicago and was about to open in Los Angeles. "And there's more," she announced, helping herself to a salad. "Victoria received an invitation to present our program model at Congress. They're considering implementing art therapy as part of the public mental health system." Griffin watched as Marlowe interacted with Hope, patiently explaining why she couldn't see her little brother yet. The scene made him reflect on how their lives had changed in recent years. What had started out as a tragedy, his memory loss, Victoria's manipulation, had turned into something much bigger than themselves. "The Guggenheim wants an answer by the end of the week," he commented, turning his attention to Charlotte. "We need to structure a solid proposal." "I already have some ideas," Marlowe interjected, helping Hope with her lunch. "We can expand the concept of art as a tool for social transformation, not just for the resident artists, but for the community as a whole." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Hayes showed up with proofs of the book she was writing about the foundation's history, The Art of Redemption, How a Love Story Transformed the American Art Scene, would be released in the fall. "You've created something extraordinary here," Rebecca commented, flipping through the pages of the manuscript. "It's not just about art or therapy or philanthropy. It's about how love can turn even the most difficult situations into opportunities for growth." Hope, fascinated by the images in the book, excitedly pointed to the photos of her favorite works at the Art Center. Her early interest in art came as no surprise. After all, she had practically been born amidst canvases and brushes. "Mom, painting?" she asked, already running towards a studio that occupied one of the wings of the mansion. "After your nap, my love," Marlowe promised, noticing the first signs of sleepiness on her daughter's face. When Hope finally fell asleep, Griffin found Marlowe in her studio, working on a new series that explored the theme of motherhood and transformation. The vibrant colors and fluid shapes perfectly captured the joy and anxiety of her recent discovery. "Do you think we're ready?" she asked, a hand resting unconsciously on her still flat belly. "For all of this, a new baby, the expansion of the foundation?" Griffin wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of ink and lavender that always accompanied her. "I don't think we're ever completely ready for the big changes," he answered honestly. "But look what we can create when we face the unexpected together." The afternoon sun filtered through the studio windows, creating dancing patterns on the floor. On his easel, Marlowe's most recent canvas showed a female figure enveloped in light, her arms outstretched as if about to embrace the future. It was an image that perfectly captured the moment they were living in, full of possibilities, hope, and love. And as the day progressed, bringing with it promises of new beginnings, Griffin and Marlowe knew that every challenge they faced would be just another brushstroke in their shared story of redemption and transformation. The day of the launch of Rebecca Hayes' book coincided with the 3-year anniversary of the Montgomery Bennett Foundation. The Guggenheim Museum's Great Hall was filled with familiar faces and new allies, all gathered to celebrate not just a publication, but a journey of transformation that had touched thousands of lives. "Mommy, look," Hope exclaimed, running towards one of the walls where a series of photographs documented the evolution of the Art Center. At 2.5 years old, she was already showing Marlowe's artistic eye and Griffin's determination. Marlowe, now in her 5th month of pregnancy, smiled as she watched her daughter. The little navy blue dress Hope wore was a lovely contrast to the dark curls they had inherited from their father. Her own emerald green dress had been specially designed to accommodate her growing belly. "It's amazing to think how it all began," Victoria commented, approaching with a copy of the book in her hands. Her work with art therapy had expanded to 20 centers across the country, and she had just returned from a series of lectures at Congress. Griffin, who was overseeing the final details of the event with Charlotte, couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the moment. The woman who had once tried to destroy his happiness was now a key partner in his most significant project. "The Congress program has been approved," Charlotte announced, joining the group. "Art therapy will officially be included in the public mental health system from next year." The news was greeted with emotional smiles. Marcus Hartley, who had just arrived with a group of young artists from the residency program, raised his glass in a silent toast. "Griffin, Marlowe," Rebecca called out, gesturing for them to approach the small stage set up for the occasion. "It's time." Hope ran into her father's arms, who caught her easily as he led Marlowe through the hall. The guests turned to look at the family, who had turned a personal story of loss and redemption into a national movement for social change through art. 3 years ago, Rebecca began her speech. A series of seemingly tragic events brought two people together in unexpected ways. What could have ended in bitterness and resentment blossomed into something extraordinary. Marlowe felt the baby move, as if responding to Rebecca's words. Griffin, sensing her emotion, intertwined his fingers with hers. "The Art of Redemption is not just a book about the Montgomery Bennett Foundation," Rebecca continued. "It's a testimony to the transformative power of love, art, and forgiveness. It's proof that sometimes we need to lose something precious in order to find something even more valuable." Hope, sitting on Griffin's lap, applauded enthusiastically at every pause in the speech, drawing affectionate smiles from the audience. "Today," Rebecca continued, "the foundation has not only changed the American art scene, but revolutionized the way we see art as a tool for healing and social transformation. More than 5,000 people have been directly impacted by its programs." Victoria, who was close to the stage, discreetly wiped away a tear. Her own journey of redemption had become a significant chapter in the book, inspiring others to seek change through art. "And now," Rebecca paused dramatically, "I'm delighted to announce that the Montgomery Bennett Foundation model will be implemented in cultural centers in 3 European countries next year." The news took even Griffin by surprise. Marlowe squeezed her hand, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Hope asked, her childish voice echoing in the microphone Griffin held. The innocent question provoked affectionate laughter from the audience. Marlowe leaned over to kiss her daughter's cheek. "Because sometimes we're so happy that tears are the only way to express how we feel," she explained. Rebecca invited Griffin and Marlowe to say a few words. With Hope still in his arms, Griffin approached the microphone. "When I woke up in that hospital 3 years ago, with no memory of the weeks before, I thought I had lost something precious forever," he began. "What I didn't know was that I was about to gain something much greater. Not just a family, but a purpose." Marlowe continued, "Art has the power to heal, to transform, to give a voice to those who have been silenced. Through the foundation, we have discovered that the most powerful stories are those of redemption and second chances." The event continued into the night, with readings of excerpts from the book and performances by the resident artists. Hope eventually fell asleep in Charlotte's arms, while Griffin and Marlowe circulated among the guests, sharing stories and plans for the future. When they finally arrived home, the Montgomery mansion was silent under the Manhattan moonlight. Griffin carried a sleeping Hope to her bedroom, decorated with reproductions of her favorite works of art from the center. "You know what impresses me the most?" Marlowe commented as they prepared for bed. "How something that started with so much pain turned into so much beauty." Griffin pulled her into his arms, one hand resting protectively on her belly. It's because you've always seen beyond the pain, love. You've turned every obstacle into an opportunity to create something meaningful. A soft kick from the baby made them both smile. In a few months, their family would grow again, bringing more colors to the ever-evolving canvas of their lives. "The proposal I made that day," Griffin murmured, "when I found you passed out in front of the building, was the best impulse I've ever followed." "And to think it was only the beginning of our story," Marlowe replied, snuggling closer to him. Outside, the lights of Manhattan twinkled like earthly stars, silent witnesses to a story that had begun with a loss of memory and blossomed into a legacy of love, art, and transformation that would continue to touch lives for generations.